Hi, welcome to lecture 3.6 of the SAGE-based course on Monte Carlo methods. We were looking at loops earlier, and you're supposed to do some U-tries upstairs here. Once you're familiar with for loops, we will now look into conditional statements. A conditional statement is also known as an if statement or if-else statement. And it's basically as simple as that. If some condition is true, then you do something. To make it more powerful, we can also say else, that is, if not, then do a different something. The if statement syntax is a way of putting into a programming language a way of thinking that we use every day. For example, if it is raining, I'll take the bus to uni, else I'll walk. You'll notice that when we have an if statement, what we do depends on whether the condition we specify is true or false. That is conditional on this expression. This is why if statements are called conditional statements. When we say depends on whether the condition we specify is true or false, in SAGE terms, we are talking about whether the expression we specify as our condition evaluates to the Boolean true or the Boolean false. Remember those Boolean values, true and false, that we talked about earlier? The SAGE syntax for a conditional statement, including if and else clauses, is explained below. First, you start with the keyword if. Immediately after the keyword if, we specify the condition that determines what happens next. The condition therefore has to be the kind of truth statement we talked about in the first week. That is an expression which SAGE can evaluate as either Boolean true or Boolean false. The examples below will make this a bit clearer. Number 3. After we have specified the condition, we end the line with a colon before continuing to the next line. Now immediately below the line that starts if we give the code that says what happens if the condition we specified is true. This block of code is indented so that SAGE can recognize that it should do everything in that block if the condition is true. If the condition is false, SAGE will not go into this indented block to execute any of this code, but instead look for the next line which is aligned with the original if. That is the next line which is not part of the if block. In some situations, we only want to do something if the condition is true, and there is nothing else we want to do if the condition is false. In this situation, all we need is the if block of code described above, the part that is executed only if the condition is true. Then we can carry on with the rest of the program. An everyday example would be, if it is cold, I'll wear gloves. In some other situations, however, we also want to specify something to happen when the condition is false, the so-called else block. We specify this by following the if block with the keyword else aligned with the if, so that SAGE knows this is where it jumps to when the if condition is false. The keyword else is also followed by a colon. Okay. Finally, immediately below the line that starts else, we say what happens if the condition we specified is false. Again, this block of code, or the else block, is indented so that SAGE can recognize that it should do everything in that block if the condition is false. Alright, it's a lot better to do this by examples. So note that SAGE will either execute the code in the if block or will execute the code in the else block. Okay, this is an exclusive or. What happens, that is, which block gets executed, depends on whether the condition evaluates to true or false. Let's set up a nice simple conditional statement and see what happens. We want to take two variables named x and y and print something out only if x is greater than y. So the condition is x greater than y. And you can see that this evaluates to either true or false depending on the values of x and y. Okay, so here's our cell, x equals 50 is the first line. We're assigning the value 50 to the variable x. We're assigning the value 40 to the variable y in the second line. Now starts the if. So if, and here is the statement, the expression that evaluates to true or false, and here is the colon. Okay, that is the end of this if expression keyword. And then here is the block, the if block. You see the if block is followed by 1, 2, 3, 4 white spaces. So there's only one line in this block. It's indented. So if the condition is true, it'll print the string x is greater than y. If x is indeed greater than y, it'll print that. So this is again just okay, so the comment here. Now finally it's going to print, once it gets out of this indented block, the body of the if statement, then it'll print this is the end of my first conditional statement. So let's evaluate that. So we know that x is 50 and it's greater than 40y, so it is going inside here and printing the statement for us. Okay. Now we can nest conditional statements so that one whole conditional statement is in the if block or else block of another one. So it's the same idea now. Once again, let's make this a little smaller so these comment wraps are not as hard to understand. So there we go. So we have x, y, and z assigned, and if x is greater than y, colon, here is now the block. So now we have an if nested inside an if statement. Okay, and this is the body of the second if statement, and finally we get out. This should again be self-explanatory. Okay, so you should try and follow this example slowly and make sure that it makes sense, and the syntax and the levels of indentations should also be clear to you. Finally, go through this U-try on your own. These are the conditional statements in example 4, and once you have gone through these U-tries, you are pretty much done. Okay, so here is actually all the hidden code for the probability map class for the last U-try, and it's the same as the class from last week. Okay, so let's unhide them and enjoy yourself. Okay, so let's recall that this week's material started with a review of probability from last week. We talked about the notion of independence, and then we talked about the definition of conditional probability, and gave you some examples, invited you to the idea of Bayes' theorem being nothing more than applying the definition of conditional probability twice with an arrangement of the intersection operator, and you are strongly encouraged to watch these videos from the Khan Academy about this bag of 10 coins to get into conditional probability and Bayes' theorem. And finally, we did a little U-try where we simulated rolling dice inside the computer using randint without really understanding what randint is doing under the hood. We'll come to that later next week. The next major concept was random variables for the week, and a random variable was nothing but a mapping from the sample space to the real line, and we talked about the formal definition of a random variable, a discrete random variable, how probabilities are assigned to random variables, distribution function, what it means, and we looked at various examples again to reinforce these ideas. And you are once again encouraged to watch this Khan Academy video on Introduction to Random Variables from a slightly less formal point of view. Then we looked at various examples. Here we were going to simply reinforce these ideas using the probability class from last week to talk about random variables now. So these are U-tries. You should try them on your own and make sure that you're able to take these theoretical ideas and enact them in Sage. Okay, so here's again a coin tossing experiment. Now, the other major concept for this week was the indicator function. We talked about the probability mass function and the theta parametric family of random variables called the Bernoulli random variable. This is our model of a random variable. And I explained the probability mass function and the distribution function for the Bernoulli random variable. And after that, we talked about basic ways of manipulating programs in Sage using a for loop. And we looked at some examples and to do some U-tries. And finally, we ended with looking at conditional statements, if statements and if-else statements in Sage. And the last set of 2 U-tries for you to go through on your own. And that's the end of this lecture. See you next week.